There is abundant evidence illustrating the way in which the use of EBVs and dollar indexes has improved not only individual herds, but also breeds in general. A little later, we'll take a look at the way in which some of the major breeds in Australia have benefited from the uptake and use of the genetic tools that are now available. But first of all, let's see how EBVs have delivered results in practical field trials. Throughout this section, you'll see examples illustrated with data from trial results. To see more trial results, follow the links on this page.
And the thing about an estimated breeding value is that we can use performance records and separate out the genetics from the environment. The performance of an animal for many traits is both the effect of the genes as well as the environment it's running in. And the environment is the cumulative effect of the property of origin, the backgrounder, the feedlot or finishing environment. And what breed plan does is it separates out the genetics from the environment. And that's the key, to take those performance records and use that to estimate a breeding value based on the performance record. So an EBV simply predicts the difference between the animals in the performance of their progeny when they're treated alike. There are several studies that have been done that show EBVs work. Commonly they use bulls that are high and low for a particular EBV and use those to generate progeny of those size. The first one is a study that was done in central Queensland where they picked high and low Brahman sires based on their growth EBVs and bred those to cows, Brahman cows, and ran them in the same environment. The difference in EBVs between the two groups was 40 kilos, and therefore we expect half the difference in the progeny, and the study showed in the steers that were generated a 22 kilo difference in the high steers versus the low steers. An example that EBVs work for carcass traits comes from the Durham progeny test program. The top 5 sires in that project in a particular year, when compared to the bottom 5 sires based on their carcass weight EBVs, the top 5 sires had an average EBV of plus 46 for their carcass weight, the bottom sires plus 18, which is a 28 kilo difference. When these bulls were then joined to shorthorn cows and we slaughtered the steer progeny, the carcass weights from the top 5 sires were 13.5 kilos heavier than those from the bottom 5 sires, which is very close to the expectation of 14 kilos based on their size EBV. An example of carcass and meat quality traits comes from the CRC program that is run by New South Wales Agriculture in southern New South Wales. Here EBVs were used from the Angus breed to pick sires that were high intramuscular fat and low for yield, and they were just simply picked off the breed plan reports, and also picking sires that were low IMF and high yielding, so 2 groups of sires. These bulls were then joined to Hereford cows and managed the same, and those steer progeny we've shown from the high IMF bulls were 5.8% intramuscular fat versus 4.1% in the low yielding and in the low IMF sires. And for their retail beef yield, their RBY percent, the low yielding sires were 67% versus the high yielding sires, which was 67.8%, showing that the EBVs used to pick those bulls were being very much reflected in the differences of their progeny for their carcass, intramuscular fat and retail beef yield. The graphs certainly illustrate that we can use EBVs to select the better animals for a trait and make progress in those individual traits. However, that doesn't always translate into increased profitability. The important thing to able to select for increased profitability or improve the total profit via selection is to then use the costs and returns and the trait antagonisms, putting economic values on those traits to make sure that the correct emphasis is put on each of the traits that drive total profitability, and in that way we're able to increase the genetics of profitability and not just for a single trait.